Welcome to Dear Watchers, a comic book omniverse podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We're traveling through the storylines before and after our alternate universe. I can't remember doing it off the top of my head. So here's our intro music. And your watchers on this journey continue to be me, Guido.
And me, the raccoon that is actually piloting Rob.
So the reason I don't have my script open is this is a really exciting bonus episode we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
We had to do it because we just saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, and talking about it so much led us to conclude that we wanted to share some of these thoughts, right?
Yes, it did. I mean, it's a perfect companion to our podcast because it's all about multiverses and omniverses.
It is. And so, fair warning, total spoilers.
Yes.
We're not going to hold back from anything. So if you have
I
not
already
yet seen
spoiled
the
there's a
movie...
raccoon in the movie, so...
Oh, yeah. That's not nice.
It's in the trailer.
But-
there is a raccoon in the trailer, so if you've seen the
Yeah,
trailer...
but you don't know the one does not know the plot that you divulged. But we'll leave it in there. And
I think I might have
hopefully
just
no one's mad
confused
at
people
us.
even more by just saying that there's a raccoon that's, like, piloting a person, though.
So if you haven't seen the movie and care about spoilers, then stop listening and come back and listen after you have. If you haven't seen the movie and don't care about spoilers, then keep listening because you might be inspired to see it based on what we talk about. And so I think that we should just launch right in because we both love this movie and have a lot to say, and we came up with a way of sharing it. So we're going to go through 10 things that we liked about the movie and 2 questions that we have about the movie. So who's going to start?
I'll start. And
Okay.
I'll start by talking a little bit about a thing I liked with the rules of the world. And in the movie, they set up this rule that if you kill a body that your consciousness, your multiverse consciousness is inhabiting in that world, then that body is dead and that consciousness cannot take that body. So if I killed you, Guido, in our world, then the Guidos from the other universes cannot inhabit your body. And that's a really strong rule, and I think movies like this are really made on rules like this. And it's a great way to kind of have this interdimensional, inter-universe battle play out. Gives it real stakes there.
It also, as you talked about, it is the explanation as to why Evelyn's father, but the alpha version of him, wants to kill Joy. So the rule makes sense. It makes sense in the battle and the progression of the plot.
Mm-hmm.
All right. My first thing I like is also going to be a rule. It is a rule I have never heard before, and I love, and I'm now really eager for other storytellers to use this rule or use some version of this rule. And it's that in order to jump from universe to universe, you have to do the least probable thing, because that pulls you to the edge of your universe, and then you can leap into the multiverse. And that is really cool, just even visually, when you're looking at that map of worlds that they show on the phone, you can sort of see, it makes sense now how you jump, right? There's not a lot of multiversal jumping or time jumping sci-fi media. I feel like there's not always a explanation as to how you can jump. There's just some sort of magical device or magical person that can get you to jump. This felt like it was a, absurd but somewhat scientific rationale for, okay, well, if I do the least probable, least predicted thing, then I'm actually sort of challenging the flow of my universe, my timeline, and by pushing at that boundary, I can actually get over that boundary. So I think it is the coolest rule, not even then accounting for the coolness that it gives you in the movie where they get to just do wild things.
Yeah, and it's set up we're introduced to the idea before it's explained to us. So Evelyn is told to put her shoes on the wrong feet, and we see Waymond eating the chapstick. So it's introduced, and we're like, why are they doing that? What does that have to do? And only then is it explained. So that's great. Yeah. And then the other thing I like is that it's also set up in the movie that you can't really fake it. Because Evelyn at one point is trying to say, I love you to Deidre, but she's not really saying it. So it doesn't really work. And Waymond is trying to give himself the paper cuts, but he even says you can't really give yourself a paper cut when you're trying to do it. So it's great that like it's set up that like you really have to believe in what you're doing in order for it to work. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about I think this movie, we're talking about these rules, which are really kind of high sci-fi ideas, but this movie also has a real mix of kind of the high and low, if you will. So there's these big, grand sci-fi concepts. Then there's also a great emotional core of this family and an intergenerational family. But then there's also lots of super fun silliness. So there is dildos, and there is hot dog fingers, and they're sticking trophies in your butt, and lots of other really goofy things, and some things that you could call quote unquote sophomore or gross out or something like that. But that sits right aside these big kind of grand and emotional concepts, and that kind of combination of the two is a really, really rare thing.
I think narratively it does it too, like on a somewhat more meta level, because you and I walked out of there and said that was the most entertained we'd been in a movie, and it's so entertaining, and yet it was so emotional and had all these deeper layers to the narrative. So I think even narratively it sort of fuses the pure candy entertainment delight of cinema with like a storytelling that I'll be thinking about and feeling about for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very what I'm thinking about now, it's a very different kind of show or movie, or this is a show, but we were talking about when we were watching Peacemaker too, there's a lot of gross out kind of things in that, but then they feel earned. They don't feel just there for the sake of being, oh, this is a funny joke or whatnot. It's part of the character, part of the story, and I think that's when you can really get away, quote unquote, with doing those kind of things.
All right, so my number 2 is the Hollywood homages that are throughout the film. And there are probably so many that we did not even see, which is part of why I can't wait to see it again. But the most visible to me were the Matrix homages, which both in the storytelling, but then when they cut to the Alphaverse and they're wearing the headgear to link them into the computer. And then the Wong Kar-wai homage in particular with the Singers universe where she and Waymond are in the alley toward the end. And then I did not even spot, because I have shockingly never seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, but actually Elliot pointed out to us, you had recognized it, I had not, but Elliot pointed out in our debrief with him that the apes in the hot dog universe were an homage to 2001. So I just really loved the way that they were pulling at these different archetypes, images, motifs, tropes that are present in our brains because they're present in our media. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, and I think what's neat, too, is I haven't seen as many Wong Kar-wai movies as you have, but I know he's also dealing with sometimes big sci-fi themes in some of his movies.
Yes.
2001 totally. Is very much about how one little action can resonate throughout the time and beyond time as the movie then ends with. So they're definitely, and of course the Matrix talks so much about this kind of stuff too. So they didn't just choose, oh, this is a reference to another movie, but they chose movies that also are talking about similar concepts. And for me, I'm going to stick with my Hollywood world and go with...
For your number 3.
For my number 3. And stick with the Hollywood world, which is that we see Evelyn has all these different lives, and we're shown in really fast montage cuts of all the different worlds. And one of the worlds we actually see is Michelle Yeoh, who plays Evelyn, on the red carpet at the Crazy Rich Asians premiere. And of course, Michelle Yeoh is one of the stars of Crazy Rich Asians. So I love that not only did they use that footage and they did not hide, it says it right behind her, but it almost made me think, oh wow, so maybe Michelle Yeoh is an Evelyn. Like the Michelle Yeoh of our world is an Evelyn, and she starred in Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah, that's a fun idea. I hadn't thought about that. I like it. My number 3 is going to be, my gosh, what a parable for our times.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many ways that this movie spoke to what it feels like to live in an increasingly anxious and confusing world, and to see the letter from the directors that came out with the wide release, which if you haven't read is on their Twitter and is really powerful, about their trying to address, starting writing in 2016, the too muchness of our world. And it really fit. I mean, you could read into a lot of the depression and anxiety, and then of course all of Wayman's conclusions and the lessons learned about being kind being the most important way to deal with how a day can just feel out of place, and that the world can just feel insecure, and institutions are sort of dematerializing. It really was so, yet not timely in a sense that I think in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 40 years or 50 years, it's going to feel unrelatable either. So it really pretty masterfully got at some key current issues while staying really broad and relatable.
In that way, it also reminds me of The Matrix, where The Matrix was coming out at a time when the internet was just starting to come out, and we were maybe in this more corporate world. You know, corporations were gaining even more power than they had ever before, and that movie was a bit of a reaction to that. But when you watch The Matrix now, it doesn't seem like it's commenting specifically on the late 90s. It seems like such an evergreen idea, and I think the same thing goes for this movie. Well, my number 4 is going to be performances. So we've talked about concepts a lot in this conversation, but we haven't really talked about the actors. And there's some amazing actors here. Of course, Michelle Yeoh is leading the way here. But also, the other thing I wanted to comment on is that this is a great film for older actors. So Stephanie Sue is one of the stars, and she's only in her 30s. But most of the other actors,
the others
are all older. James Hong, who plays Michelle Yeoh's father, is in his 90s, and you probably know him from Big Trouble in Little China and Blade Runner. But it's just a really great opportunity for actors, non-white actors, older actors, all these things that are still, unfortunately, rarities in Hollywood.
Including to that depth, right? I mean, I've seen some interviews with the cast talking about not being given roles or having opportunities for roles that have such a range.
Yes.
And this gives that. So on top of just being a showcase for these incredible performers and performers of an age or a race that don't often get to star, the characters and the things they have to do are actually quite diverse and different too.
Yeah.
So.
And people like Michelle Yeoh and Jamie Lee Curtis, you know, older women who also get to do these kick-ass fight sequences.
Yeah.
And that is such
they do.
a taboo. And, you know, you so
and romance, right? Like,
and romance
with
too.
each other. Like, like, so they, you know, they get to be everything in this movie.
Everything all at once.
I did not even mean for that to happen. So my number 4 is going to be generational trauma. And I think that one of the many levels that this film works and resonates with me is that idea of what you inherit from your family and what the way you're brought up and either loved or rejected by your family means. And we see really clearly what it means for Evelyn and why she might be the way that she is, and then how she transfers that onto Joy. Even though she accepts Joy's queerness, that is that is a factor, of course. Is Joy's grandfather going to be accepting of it? And just all of those questions of how we deal with trauma and love and family relationships and what that means, I think, were really powerful. And they were subtle. They slowly peel back. This movie is so impossible to characterize, so I'd never call it a movie about intergenerational trauma or family. But of course, that is so core to it also. Yes. So it slowly evolves, and I took a lot out of it, and I identified a lot with a lot of it, and it was very powerful.
Yeah, in that way, it reminds me of a little bit of what the Watchmen TV series did, which is take something genre, but talk about trauma through that lens, which is something, it still feels relatively new for film and TV to do that through a comic book kind of storytelling or a sci-fi storytelling. But in many ways, by putting it through that prism, it actually makes it resonate even more.
Well, especially because it's so counter to what Marvel and DC are doing, which obviously I love enormously. I mean, the MCU is, my other favorite movie watching experience ever in the world is you, me, and Elliot watching Endgame in the theater. But WandaVision starts to get at telling a story of something through the vehicle of genre and sci-fi, but it even barely scratches the surface, and it's the only one that I think does that. So yeah, you're right. It is a great way that some of these more independent projects, although Watchmen is DC actually, but some of these more independent projects can start to use what we know about genre films, comic book films, and tell something bigger.
Well, for my number 5, you were talking about trauma, so I'm going to end on a lighter note for myself, and I'm going to talk about that there are some really adorable and very unexpected uses of animals in this movie. So there is,
and some really and some traumatic ones.
Yes, yes, depending on your case. So there's a pig on a leash. I think the first time maybe we see Joy as the villain in the movie, she's walking a pig on the leash, which is really cute. Then
I forgot that.
Then we see a dog early on in the movie that Jenny Slate's character has, but then Jenny Slate
in a baby carriage,
which is an extra cuteness. But then, probably what you're talking about for the more traumatic, this is where the trauma comes in, is that Jenny Slate uses that dog as a weapon, and she swirls it around on her leash like the little schoolgirl in Battle Royale. That's what it reminded me of. And yes, she uses it as like this mace. There's, of course, the raccoon, which we talked about, which speaks, may or may not have the voice of Randy Newman. We were not able to confirm, but kind of...
And appears to be something Elliot pointed out that I appreciated too, is it appears to be physical, a practical effect, an animatronic. Yes, totally. I'm sure sometimes it's cleaned up or there's CG elements, but particularly when it's being carted away in the cage, like that is a, Chuck E. Cheese style animatronic sitting there in that cage. And that adds, I think, to what we appreciate about the use of that animal.
Yeah, and that it's such a great plot to take off of Ratatouille, which I've never actually seen, though I do know the concept of it, but I was able to get it without seeing it. And the one more out-of-the-box one I wanted to mention is the time when Evelyn and Joy become the rocks, and it actually reminded me of having
those are animal-like.
Well, it reminded me of having a pet rock, especially when we see the rock with the googly eyes on it. And it really reminded me of just like having a pet rock, which I did as a kid. So yeah, that
Yeah.
kind of also spoke to me as well. Maybe there's other animal stuff that I'm missing too, but those are definitely the ones that stood out to me.
Fun. All right, my fifth and final, our 10th thing we love about this movie is going to be the circle symbolism or motifs that are throughout the movie. I love recurring symbols. I love, love, love visual cues that are linked to the narrative. It's something I really appreciate in anything I'm consuming. And in this case, the circle, I'm sure there are just dozens of examples, but I really like that while, the sort of paintbrush circle is a really common Zen symbol, it becomes the symbol that Deirdre in the IRS office circles around on the receipts. It, of course, is the googly eyes, is a circle in a circle. It is the everything bagel of nihilism also. And again, debriefing with Elliot pointed out, it's the image of a black hole. So there's so much circular symbolism, and I really love imagery recurring.
The washing machines and dryers,
the washing machines, right? You pointed that out.
And has got that, literally something going around and around.
Which is almost mesmerizing, right? It pulls you in anytime. It's why, like, in any hypnosis trope in a movie or TV show, it's a spiraling circle, right?
Yes.
That's what draws you in. The Twilight Zone, of course, being a very famous example. So I love the recurring circles a lot. So we have two questions.
Questions.
Let's transition. All right, so to close us out with our two lingering questions, which, my gosh, there probably could have been a million.
Of course, yeah.
But I'll start. I'll start with my question. My question is, what would have happened if Joy or anyone, Evelyn, but Joy was the closest, went into the nihilism, into the everything bagel? Like, what would have happened? What rules of the world do we know? Like, would she have been obliterated? What would that have meant? Would that have meant that she's obliterated in every universe? Does that somehow obliterate the universe because it breaks something? I mean, I'm curious, and I love thinking about it. It is not a plot hole to me. It's something I just really love wondering, is what would have happened?
Yeah. In my mind, it goes more towards the metaphor than the depression that Joy has. And I'm also thinking about that kind of another spiraling thing is actually doom scrolling and going through social media, and that you're in this endless cycle of nihilism, really. So my kind of mind goes more towards like the real world metaphor version of that, where I could see by her jumping into the everything bagel, it's really her embracing this kind of hopelessness, which is
darkness,
I think a feeling that we've been feeling as a world a little bit with over the last few years, or at least that's kind of come to the forefront.
So all the joys and the jubies exist, but they're all now just completely devoid of any hope or love.
And I'm almost thinking, this seems very obvious that I didn't really think about until right this moment, that the character's name is Joy, and she is suffering from...
That only just occurred to you?
Yes,
through all our discussion yesterday of depression and like the way this could be an allegory for depression, it was very clear, obvious to me.
Yeah, no, I'm only just thinking of that now. Yeah.
So that is my wondering, and I don't even need an answer. I don't need a conclusion. I just like wondering it.
Yes.
What's
and
your
I'll
question?
add, we did have everything bagels this morning. I was in the mood.
What is
they
your
were
question?
not everything bagels of darkness and nihilism. And
right. We're still here and feeling love and joy.
So my question is, did Evelyn at the end of the movie choose the right multiverse to live in? So we see her kind of embracing the world that we kind of start her in. And of course we see all these other versions, one where she is a movie star but doesn't have love. Here she has love, but it's complicated. And I think one of the things that really resonated with me at the end of the movie is it is not a film where things are easily resolved. We don't know if they're going to really keep the laundromat. We don't know if Joy and Evelyn's relationship is really saved. We don't know if Waymond and Evelyn are actually going to stay together either. So Evelyn has actually chosen the universe where there are still all of these unpredictable moments ahead.
Yeah, I guess some of answering this question, which is why it's interesting to wonder about too, is requires a sense of it's like reminding me a lot of Loki. What's the sacred timeline?
Mm-hmm.
And who's deciding what the sacred timeline is? And then that raises all sorts of questions of like destiny, right? So do we imagine that if Evelyn had left the prime Earth, I don't know what else to call it. I think they might refer it to the beta verse at some point, but if she left the Earth we see, her consciousness, that Evelyn will still exist. It's just she will not be a part of it. So what does that mean? What is she doing to that Evelyn? And then if she lands in a singing universe and stays there because it's a more attractive, appealing universe, like what does that mean for that consciousness? Or like it requires a sense of how all of that plays out and what's predestined, and when you deviate from that, which is predestined, what does it mean? So, I mean, obviously for narrative purposes, I think she chose the right one because she chose to stay and make change, right?
Yes.
She chose to do something different.
And
she chose to out Joy to her father. She chose to give Joy the space to step away, but remind her that she loves her and wants her there and is a safety net for her.
And commit to that universe, because we get the sense earlier on when actually they go to the IRS that she's had all these hobbies, which are of course pulling from the other multiverses, that she's a singer, and that she always had this kind of commitment. And of course, when we first see her in the movie, she's super harried and she's trying to do 10 things at once, and she's not really sitting down doing just one thing.
Well, lack of commitment.
Lack of commitment.
Yeah.
Yes. And at the end of the movie, we kind of then see, even kind of the last line is her kind of zeroing in and saying like, okay, I'm listening. I'm here now. I'm not dividing my attention. And maybe, you know, of course, in that moment she is doing that, but maybe we can also assume that she will be doing that for her family as well, not dividing her attention, really being there with them.
So what do you think? If you're listening to this, please join us on Twitter and tell us, what did you like? What questions do you have? Obviously, we both love this film. It will be one of my favorite films. And I am glad we got to share 10 things we liked and 2 questions we had about everything, everywhere, all at once.
Yeah,
so you can follow us online
at Dear Watchers, or send us an email as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the movie. And we will be back soon with another trip through the multiverse.
Make sure to subscribe, review, and share.